Welcome everyone to this week's Future Strong. My name's Nikki Garchea and I'm here today with Lindsay Pollock, my co-host for the series, and we have great guests with Stephen and Helen from Cappfinity. I'm the co-founder of Cappfinity and also the Chief Customer Officer. Io Psychologist by background, but in an esteemed company with greater Io psychologists than myself today. And as they speak, you will see why. The series Future Strong is really here at these times to discuss everything to do with emerging talent. And we are delighted today to pick up on a very pertinent topic around assessment, thinking about what we learned from 2020 and looking ahead to 2021. For any of you who don't know Cappfinity, we are an assessment, development and transformation business with a particular focus on strengths. And as we go through the session today, you're going to learn a whole heap about strengths-based assessment. Stephen, I'm so grateful that Jake, your Black Lab, could join us, because as he said to you, this is what Future Strong's all about. It's about bringing what we have at home into the session. So he is now world famous. Without further ado, Lindsay, I will pass to you, and it's great to hear how your week's been.
Thank you so much, Nikki. Hi, everyone. My name...
I'm just going to ask you to mute just in case we've got background noise.
There we go. Hi, everyone. Nikki, thank you so much. My name is Lindsay Pollock. We are so delighted to have you with us this week. I never thought I would feel left out not being an Io psychologist, but today I feel super left out not being in that club. You'll have to describe what an Io psychologist is and does for everybody. It's something I've learned as a brand ambassador for Cappfinity. I'm the author of 4 books. The newest is Recalculating, Navigate Your Career Through the Changing World of Work, which is coming out on March 23rd. I'm also a consultant and speaker and work very closely with Cappfinity. I am so thrilled to have Helen and Stephen with us today. Helen, if you can introduce yourself first, tell us a little bit about you, and then pass it over to Stephen.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you, Nikki, for such a lovely, warm reception. It's brilliant to be with you today. So I'm Helen Davey. I'm a Io psychologist, which is seems to be the coin of the group. So I'm the Chief Assessment Officer at Cappfinity. As an Io psychologist, or an occupational psychologist, as we call it in the UK, I oversee all of our psychology and science behind the solutions that we deploy for our clients. So this is all about developing assessment solutions that can be deployed in hiring, in development, and, as Nikki says, in transformation contexts, and in the process, hopefully giving a great experience and outcome for the candidates that we service. Stephen, anything you want to add?
Oh, sure. Yeah, great. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. As Helen said, it's great to be here this morning. Like Helen and Nikki, I'm an Io psychologist as well. I spent my entire career helping organizations leverage assessments for either talent acquisition or post-hire talent management programs. So from a talent acquisition perspective, I've been really fortunate and had the opportunity to design high volume, non-exempt hiring processes, executive assessment processes, and then from a post-hire perspective, work with leadership and designing high potential programs, succession planning programs, and of course, working with coaching and development. So regardless of the process or the program that I've done, it's all been integral around assessments. I am very passionate about assessments. I've spent my entire career working with assessments and really enjoy helping people identify roles that will maximize their potential. So it's great to be here today to talk about this important topic. Seems like I'm in good company, and and I think Lindsay asked for somebody to explain a little bit about what an Io psychologist is. You want me to give 30 seconds on that, then I can defer to others. So industrial organizational psychology in the United States is technically I guess it's Division 14 of the American Psychological Association. We are, I would say, by far the smallest niche in that market. Our application and our craft, if you will, is to apply psychological principles to organizations. I forget the latest number, but there's 20 something different topic areas. Of course, my focus, Helen's focus, Nikki's focus is on selection, which is historically industrial psychology. Organizational psychology would be things like job attitudes, motivation, things like that, much broader constructs, if you will, not to use jargon. But industrial organizational psychology has been around about 100 years. And ironically, a lot of the advancements are through wars, where we have drafts and we have to assign people to different jobs that will maximize their ability to serve the country. So ironically, a lot of the work dates back to, world wars and things like that. So that's the, 30 seconds on Io Psychology. Of course, Helen or Nikki, if you've got anything to add from a UK perspective, that'd be great.
That's so interesting about the wars. I didn't know that fact. Of course, I'm, thinking of like a New Yorker cartoon of a corporation sitting on a couch in a therapist's office crying into a tissue. For some reason, that's the image I'm getting of corporate psychology. But thank you for that. That's so helpful for that definition. And Helen, I want to turn to you and really get a good definition of strengths. And why would an organization hire for strengths? And I think a lot of us have had experiences, whether it was working in high school jobs or beyond, of doing an interview and sort of seeing if it was a good fit, right? And if it felt right, and maybe you'd have to take a spelling test or something like that. What are strengths? And why would an organization choose to hire based on strengths? And I really like Stephen's historical perspective. Is this a new concept? Has this been around for a while? Does it go back to the wars as well? Let's bring strengths into the conversation.
Thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, wonderful question. So Stephen's absolutely right. Historically, one of the best ways to hire people into jobs has always been regarded to look at what a person has done or what they can do. And that is typically, to answer your question of what is a strength, that is the first thing that we look for in a strength, which is evidence of performance. So that is typically how well can somebody perform something. The thing which makes a strength really special, and the critical difference in how we define it at Cappfinity, is also how energized or how passionate somebody feels about performing that particular thing. So it isn't just enough to be able to do the thing. You have to also feel that buzz, feel that that engagement when you're doing that particular activity. And ideally, the third thing is that you also have the opportunity, the use to be able to practice that thing in your occupation regularly. And what we've seen in the kind of 15 years that we've been evolving this methodology is a real shift from companies who typically have only just looked at the first dimension, that's performance. And by looking at those other pieces of evidence, you start to really tap a very special insight into somebody's potential. One of the best places that I think you can that we can all kind of relate to this is when you're at the very beginning of your career. And generally, when you're right at the beginning of your career, you don't have much experience, you don't have much to talk about. You have loads of enthusiasm, loads of potential, but none of that evidence yet with which to describe your capability. And what Strengths does as an assessment methodology is draw on other aspects of a person's life to be able to capture that evidence. So an example that I personally always really enjoy giving is one way that we might ask for evidence is to say, Lindsay, please can you give me an example recently of when you have demonstrated great credibility? And Lindsay will be able to think of plenty of things in her repertoire to be able to demonstrate that. When you were 14, that might have been a little bit more tricky to think about. And a different question to tap that might be, how would you go about imagining if you were in this situation that you would demonstrate that you were really confident? What would you do? And that gives a different opportunity for somebody to present themselves and give evidence in that way. I'll pause, Lindsay. Is there anything that resonates with you?
I mean, absolutely. I think that I've taken the Cappfinity Strengths profile, which is part of the V product, and learned that my number one strength is narrator. And I don't think I ever, you're both going like, yeah, duh. I don't think I ever would have said it that way. Maybe you'd say storyteller or writer or speaker, but to put it in that term has really shifted for me. And Nikki, I want to put you on the spot and have you describe yours, because I think it's so powerful to talk about in the pandemic, how it shifted. There is something so powerful about being able to name a skill that is not a job title, but is instead the strength and the idea that it's something you actually enjoy. Because I'll be honest, I think I've talked to Alex Lindley, the co-founder of Cappfinity, about this. There are things that I'm very good at that I am so tired of doing that I don't want to do them anymore. And to identify that that is legitimate and not something I have to do just because I'm good at it is really, really powerful. Nikki, I'd love for you to talk about your strengths and then pose another question, because I think it talks about how a strength is also, did I freeze?
Only a little. Only
Okay.
a little. We can still hear you. I'm still thinking about 14-year-old Lindsay. I think there'll be a lot of questions about that, and maybe a separate session as well.
It wasn't until I was 16 I had my first job, and it was at a video store, as we've all talked about. So I was always interested in stories. That's so 80s of me. But Nikki, talk a little bit about strengths and how you've experienced it.
I think one of the things I've spoken about before is looking at strengths profile at these times, particularly during these months that are so unusual for us, and unusual, really different in different countries and different regions. I think my past example of the first lockdown was I went back to my strengths profile and saw that my top strength was adventure, and it made me really, really reimagine the homeschooling experience. And this time I've really dialed up my creativity, and it took me quite a few weeks to think, how was I going to kind of cope this time round with the two small ones at home? And I'm doing something really uncharacteristically like me, which is deciding that every day is just going to be creative and varied. And Stephen knows I love order, so I've like kicked that out, and everything now, no day is the same. It just has to be completely different, rather than thinking that it's got to be regimented. So sort of bringing a different strength to the fore, applying to this new situation. But the thing, and we should know this at Cappfinity, but the thing that always astounds me is, even at the point where you think you're on empty, that strengths give you that extra bit of energy. And when then carried out over a number of months, and this is why it's so good for job performance, is this level of optimism that can come through by actually starting to put your strengths in practice. So I would, and I know we're quite evangelical at Cappfinity, but I'd really urge people to be considering, particularly as we kind of come to the end of January, and people I do think have struggled with this January more than others, to think about both in terms of at home, but also work, and, you know, linking it back to Future Strong from a career search perspective, to not feel confined by how we deal with things. And often strengths can give us that lens of looking at a project, looking at how I'm going to do my career search, thinking about things that maybe are broader, and they don't have to be just down a single track. I'm gonna flip it to Stephen, because Stephen is a new member of the Cappfinity team, already got quite the fan club in the UK, and I would love, Stephen, just to share, when you're thinking about some of the similarities and differences in assessment within the two regions. I'd just love your perspectives on what ways you think there's some synergy and similarity, and some of the differences that you see.
Yes, of course. What a profound question. So I think to provide a framework for our audience, Nikki, I know we've talked about this before. I think anytime you think about science and how to evaluate assessments, and certainly we could apply that same logic across borders and across geographies. So when I think about assessments, I think about validity, which of course is accuracy. Are we measuring something correctly? Are we predicting performance? Helen talked about strengths. We want to make sure strengths are, measured correctly, so on and so forth. So validity is very important. Cost is important, which is not necessarily the point of the call today, but obviously solutions need to be cost effective. They need to be, meet budgets and things like that. You want to be able to demonstrate ROI. Legal issues is also important, certainly in the current environment that everybody's well aware of. In 2020, there was a lot of things going on in the states that I'm sure we'll get into here shortly. But legal issues are very, very important. And then finally, candidate experience. I think there's a real opportunity there. I'll share a few thoughts on that here in a second. And finally, end user experience. So end user experience can be reporting and dashboards, things like that. You have to have a PhD in Io Psychology to figure out who to hire. That is clearly not what you want. So putting all that together, and then to address your question, Nikki, I think about validity, cost, legal issues, candidate experience, and end user experience. So the similarities, there are quite a few, and that was one of the things that struck me when I was going through the hiring process at Cappfinity. I had a chance to take some of my own medicine and participate in assessments, and of course, I'm wondering what's going on behind the scenes, and it was very interesting. I will say initially the assessment solutions are similar, so cognitive ability type measures, numerical reasoning, verbal reasoning, abstract reasoning. Very similar across geographies, very common in the UK, very common in the United States. Situational judgment tests, situational strengths tests, as we might call it at Cappfinity. Interviews. So the tools that are available in the two geographies are quite similar. So that is good. So they're easily relatable. I think one of the great things, really, being a science type person, is that validity is really held to the same standard. That was something that we spent quite a bit of time on, trying to understand validity. So I'll say some jargon, but construct validity, criterion related validity. Helen, I'm happy to expand on those if you wish. But the standards that are expected in the United States have been met in the UK, which is really, really important. So an American client wouldn't have to necessarily wonder, and it's no coincidence I led with validity on my 5 pillars before. Validity is the most important, really. At the end of the day, if the solution doesn't work, you're not going to get ROI. It doesn't matter how great the candidate experience is. This is not going to work. You're going to hire the wrong people. You're going to promote the wrong people. And it's just going to be the beginning of a whole slew of problems. So it was really great as an American, coming on board and comparing and contrasting. It was great to see that the tools are similar and the validity is similar. Where we are very, very different in a couple of different areas. One is the legal environment, as I said earlier. In America, we have to package our reporting quite differently. So we have a lot of subgroup analyses that we have to do, the protected classes in the United States. So there is a packaging of results that might be a little bit different to meet EEOC standards. There are 3 lexicons, if you will, with Io Psychology in the States that business professionals use, in particular Io practitioners. The uniform guidelines from the government, the EEOC, the principles, which are drafted by a professional organization called PSYOP, and finally, the standards that are created by the American Psychological Association. So putting all that together, we have to report slightly different in the United States because of the legal environment and the protected classes. And finally, one last comment as far as differences is candidate experience. American companies, by and large, want things done yesterday. And companies are really looking to shorten their hiring process and make it very fast. And the problem with that is that you lose validity. You can't possibly know a lot about somebody with a 10-minute assessment. And I think in the age of virtual assessments and what happened in 2020, organizations, I think, really need to pay attention to candidate experience, because it's going to be a very important touch point, because candidates aren't going into offices for hiring. So what I've been really pleased with is some of the tolerance for longer solutions in the UK, whereas in the States, they tend to be very abbreviated. And I think organizations need to take a good look at that, because that's going to be a heavy branding and marketing issue going forward.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And I just want to acknowledge we are having some visual technical difficulties, but everybody's audio is fine. So thank you for sticking with us. Helen, I want to dig deeper into some of those great points that Stephen brought up, particularly about 2020. I'd love your thoughts on how all of the events of the year, from the pandemic to the election in the United States to political issues and Brexit, certainly in the UK, increased attention to racial justice. I mean, there's so many things going on. How has that shaped talent acquisition needs and desires for assessment? What's the lay of the land based on all of these various events of the past year?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and thanks so much, Stephen, for laying that foundation. I think there's so much to say on this subject. I think, interestingly, in the UK, there has been probably for the last 5 years an increasing desire from our client group to really do everything that they can to try and diversify the different groups of candidates that they are bringing into their organizations. But I think what 2020 has done is just accelerated that need even further. So exactly like you highlight, Lindsay, really what 2020 has done is sort of acted as a huge springboard for moving those conversations forward. So whereas we might have had some clients who were much further ahead than others in thinking about how they might ensure that they are using selection practices which are fair across all underrepresented groups, and that goes across all of the different protected characteristics that Stephen is describing. We're now finding that this is something that thankfully all clients want to come and talk to us about. One thing that I think is very interesting in the UK, we, as I mentioned, for the last 5 years, we've probably had quite a lot more success in some ways in terms of using and promoting different alternative methods of assessment, which we know are fairer and go a lot further in terms of leveling the playing field. So one of the easy things that practitioners can think about is any simple selection sort of hurdles or processes that you might have in your overall campaign that are inadvertently acting as a barrier to diversity. So simple things might be the types of qualifications that you're asking for, the university that you're interested that candidates might have attended. What we know from the data that we've been able to collect with clients, particularly, as I say, in this last 5 years, is that they do act as indirect arbitrary criteria that can shrink your candidate pool from a diversity perspective. And so something that we have been very strongly trying to advocate for a long time is the use of strengths-based measures which level that playing field. So to answer your question, Lindsay, really 2020 is just, for us, it's just been a great momentum for being able to drive those conversations forwards and take us to the next stage in those solutions.
If I could borrow a Lindsay term and weigh in here, to Stephen and Helen, one of the things that we predicted and we discussed quietly, I think, when educational results were becoming quite checkered in 2020, was what did it mean to have individuals who weren't getting the same level of schooling? What impact was it having on exams? What certainly has become prevalent in our clients' minds is whether they can, within this emerging talent population, rely as much on academics as they have historically. Now, from a Cappfinity perspective, academics are not as critical to us when we're looking at emerging talent, because we've always wanted, to Helen's point, diversify and level the playing field. But I do wonder if you would have advice for both recruiters and possibly career services that are listening to say, what is a good way, if we don't have academics, to try and guide your assessment process to still get a measure of capability? Are there particular criteria, top tips that you would offer? I leave it open so you can fight over who's going to answer the next question.
You go for it, Stephen. You go for it.
Well, sure. I can jump in first. Yeah, that is really where the proverbial rubber hits the road. So what are the practical tips? And I think we've touched on a big one already, which is to not strictly focus on competencies. And I know that is somewhat taboo in the American market because there's frameworks and every organization relies on, not every is a gross overstatement, many organizations rely on competencies. But I think there's an opportunity, if 2020 has taught us anything, which is ironic, it's 2020, right, for vision, is to say everybody needs to take a really hard look at their process and question every component of the hiring process. What is it based on? Why is it necessary? And really, somebody needs to be held accountable. Certainly, as it relates to education, there was a unanimous Supreme Court ruling, Griggs versus Duke Power Company, that was foundational. I would call it super precedent, to use a potential legal term that's been tossed around lately. It basically says that all selection tools need to be job relevant. Well, if you don't have to have a college degree to work as an entry-level person or a manager, frankly, there's CEOs without college degrees. So I think the practical advice, if there is one, and I'll flip to Helen, I know we're short on time here. So says Stephen, I would say take a critical look at your processes and question every component. Why are you doing it? What's the purpose? What is the information you're hoping to glean from this component of your process or that component? And really look for diversity challenges. And you might be surprised. You might find that if you implement assessments up front before you talk to a candidate, the ratio of women that pass is higher, or the ratio of the Black population, the Black subgroup is higher. So just companies need to take a critical eye and evaluate their expectations and, more importantly, their assumptions. Helen, anything to add?
I agree with everything you've said, Stephen. I think an American psychologist that our CEO Alex Linley has sort of referenced regularly, and it's a quote that always sticks with me. It was Carl Rogers who says the facts are friendly, and I think the best thing that we can all do is really look, as Stephen is saying, at our processes and not be afraid to do that analysis and find out what is going on. And if there are differences that shouldn't be there, that gives our clients the opportunity to make changes and make a difference. So I agree with everything that Stephen's recommended.
So as a last question, Helen, I'll go to you first, and then Stephen, just briefly, looking forward into 2021. I know predictions are a dangerous game, especially in the year that we've had. What are you looking forward to this year? What do you think will happen? Give us just a little bit of a 2021 preview of where we're headed. And I would really love to hear a little bit about how sort of holistically people's strengths are evolving or changing given the events of 2020. So kind of a big picture from recruiting, but also from all of us. Are our strengths changing or evolving given these very unique times?
It's a lovely question, Lindsay. I think one of the lovely things about strengths, and when you get close to the literature on strengths, is that they are dynamic. So as Nikki's described, something that they can do is move around. So as you practice them, though, they get better. You can forget old ones that you've had and start something different that surprises you and gives you an opportunity to use them. I think for me in 21 for assessment, I'm looking forward to finding out what our end service users, that is our candidates, what they would really love from assessment in this new world. So everybody has spent an incredible amount at home, amount of time at home. And so the realistic job preview is changed now. You don't necessarily have to go into an office to deliver your best work. You can do that from your front room. So so much of what we have learned from assessment is that context increases validity, as Stephen has explained. And what that means is that when you typically ask questions of a candidate that are in the context of the role that they would be applying for, it helps them imagine what they would do and drive better evidence of that behavior. What I'm interested in 21 is that still the case? Do people still want in context assessments, or are we moving into a new paradigm where we're closer to the person, the human, and that is actually a more rounded insight into that individual, which includes more than just their work? That would be my interest for 21.
So interesting. Stephen, what are you looking forward to in 2021? What's on your mind?
Yeah, great insight, Helen. I think that's wonderful. I think where my head is, I think there's an opportunity for organizations to really leverage their hiring process as a competitive advantage. And as I said earlier, with candidate experience, it's it's in need of a review, right? Right now, American companies typically shorten the process as much as possible, instant gratification. I think there's an opportunity to really leverage a hiring process as a competitive advantage if you can brand it, if you can really, as Helen touched on, a realistic job preview, really engage your candidates and have a connection with them that you're going to have. I mean, we're not going to be able to sit people down in front of a computer for an hour and just have people say strongly agree to strongly disagree on 200 personality items. That's very, very common in the US. I think that ship has sailed, or at least I hope it has. I hope HR leaders look at their talent acquisition process and somebody says, wow, this is an opportunity to really leverage this and really explain to candidates who our company is, why we're having them apply, what we're looking for. And I think immersive experiences, certainly talent acquisition processes, are going to be the way to go. And I hope, given the virtual nature of the shift in 2021, I think that could become a reality, but time will tell.
Thank you. Thank you both. One of the things that I wanted to reflect on, and we'll pick up in other sessions, Lindsay, is some of the things that you and I have been hearing as we've continued the research. And I think for both countries, there is going to be a very interesting piece, and I'm thinking about your work from a generational perspective, that to a degree, the intern programs have often been in the office and they've been at central locations. And also businesses are looking to diversify their pipelines, and they can do that well from an emerging talent perspective, but they could do it even better if it became location agnostic in both countries. And I think that's going to be a really interesting challenge for recruiters as we move forward, but it could be a massive opportunity for emerging talent if they don't have to be in a set location. But I think the jury is out, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how location and office space plays when it comes to this generation.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's a lot that we are pioneering, right? We've never been in this situation. So yes, we are all committed to studying it and reporting on the results.
So Helen and Stephen, thank you so much for these contributions. The things that I think will really resonate with everyone who's listened in, the piece around validity, we can't get away from using science in the process and making sure we measure exactly what we need to up front. I think, Helen, your point, the Carl Rogers quote, "The facts are always friendly," really feeds into that. And we have to learn from our processes and iterate. It's not always the case that we get it, perfect first time. Stephen, your points around this chance to review, and I think I think there's a lot of learning from what got tried in 2020, and really now is the time for consolidation to make sure that things can really feed the demands of the business. And I think an acknowledgement that it's going to really test us, maybe all of us in this space, more than it has done before, because we've got to meet these bigger agendas, both from a diversity perspective, but also to Stephen's point, that one like silver bullet won't always fix all of the things that we want to in recruitment. So I think it's going to be a big year in assessment. And I do think we need to keep very close to our colleagues within the career services to also make sure that they can prepare this talent as things evolve so quickly. So Helen and Stephen, brilliant to have your contributions. We will as ever pop this into a blog. And Lindsay, next week, we look forward to welcoming Ray Reyes from the Opportunity Network. And we are going to do a much deeper dive on both what the network do, but also his mission from a diversity perspective. So we're going to hear about the Opportunity Network's mandate. Thank you, everybody who has listened live. And as always, to everyone who listens back to the session, great to have you with us. And we look forward to speaking to you next week.
Many thanks.